Hey guys, I've gone through the rest of the stuff I brought home and brought most of it up to my back porch. I do have a few gaps in the early volumes, unfortunately. I did get volume 3, 4, 5. Volume 6 is inside already. I think I'm missing 7, and there's 8. And I think I'm missing 9 and 10. Oh well. I may be able to get back into that place. The guy who let me in, he had an arrangement with the owner to let him in there for about 2 weeks. Well, that's over with. So if I want to get in there, I have to contact the owner and probably pay him a few bucks, and maybe he'll let me in. Plus, I got to drive out, probably like a 2-hour drive to get the key, let myself in, take what I want, and 2-hour drive back to his place to give him back the key. So just to get a few books, I don't know, that's a lot of work, but I'll think about it. Anyways, here's the TV, which actually turned out to be a lot cooler than I thought. When I saw it there, I pretty much just grabbed it as an afterthought, but it turns out it's kind of a neat set. It's a 17-inch Admiral from 1958. It's an all-metal cabinet with kind of a hammer tone silver finish. I believe it's UHF and VHF. Knobs are here on the side. Now they call this a portable, but I think it weighs about 70 pounds. So not quite so portable. The back's in good shape. And power cord. So it certainly says UHF and VHF antenna back here, so I'll have to check on the service info. It's a model P17E31 with a 15C1 chassis, run 15. And according to the service info, it's from 1958. Certainly haven't plugged it in yet, and I won't until I pop this cover up and take a closer look inside. This cord, I think, is starting to break off here, so it's something I'll definitely have to check on. Otherwise, it looks to be in really good shape. It's so nice to get the back in really good condition, and this plastic cover here, which protects the picture tube. It's not really my thing. Normally, I only work on TVs from the 40s. The newest set that I fully restored is from 51, and this is a 58, so it'll be a challenge for me. And I've also never done a portable before. But check this out. Of all the volumes I do have, I just happened to grab volume 25, one of the last in the series, and check that out. It's my set. Chassis 15C1. So I've got all the service info for it right here. So no excuse not to take a stab at it. So I can see just from this what it looks like on the inside. One thing I was kind of shocked by is that there's no transformer on this set. They would leave out the transformer to save weight, but geez, considering how heavy that thing is, I don't know how much weight they saved. But I think it'll be fun to take a look at. I bet it uses circuit boards, and these early circuit boards are such a pain, like I talked about in my video on the predicted TVs. Because as the tubes get hot over the years, they can really crack those circuit boards and the solder joints and so on. But at any rate, I will save that for another day. What I want to take a stab at tonight is the Sony the Sony CCTV camera that I picked up. So here's one of the video cameras I picked up. I think this is the nicer one by far. It's a Sony. It has a nice lens on the front. I'm going to remove it for safekeeping while I check out the rest of it. One thing I found kind of interesting is if you look through this lens, the image you see is turned upside down. They must compensate for that inside the camera and the video circuitry. Put that up on a shelf here, harm's away. So the rest of the camera, well, it's dirty, but little glass cleaner and a soft cloth will take care of that. I should have pictured this online, and there was a guy who just tossed the viewfinder that would plug into this socket and sit on top here. He had it for years, he had no use for it, so oh well, timing is everything, I guess. But even so, I hope I can get it working. So, as near as I can tell, so it runs off 120 volts AC. I'll have to replace the cord. It can output video or RF. I assume video is composite video, like 1 volt peak to peak, and RF will be able to go right into an old analog TV, but I don't know what channel it's on. Probably 3 or 4. Here's the output. All I've got is just the stump of the cable, but maybe I can unravel this and put a new piece of coax on there. Otherwise I'll just rig something up so I can attach it to a TV. External sink, I don't know what this plug is for, but I imagine I can get it to work without that. Got a switch here, off, standby, and on. And so far, that is all I know. So, let's see, we got some small Phillips screws here, so I will grab a screwdriver and pop this open and take a look inside. I just had to remove about a dozen small Phillips screws and the sides came right off. So, what have we got here? Well, here's the AC power transformer and electrolytic filter caps. I don't see any bulging tops, so that's a good sign. Looks like there's a little itty bitty flyback transformer here, which I imagine makes high voltage to power the video tube. I'm not sure if that would be called a Vidicon or an Orthicon, but inside here there is kind of the inverse of a picture tube. It's an electron tube, and inside of this cylinder there are magnetic coils that sweep an electron beam back and forth and up and down just like on a picture tube. But in this case, what's coming in the end of this camera is actually projected onto a photosensitive surface, and the electron beam scans that and can pick out the differences in the light level and relays that back into this mess of circuitry back here that turns it into a video signal. Other than that video tube, it is solid state, but kind of old. Looking around for a date code. I'm guessing it's probably the 80s. Could be late 70s. I don't think there are any integrated. No, take it back. The only integrated circuits I see are the, like 1 or 2 op amps inside of a can, but nothing very sophisticated. Otherwise, just a whole bunch of transistors in there. So what I am going to try doing is replace the power cord. I think I'll use another one salvaged from a computer, because this was a grounded cord with the white, black, and green, so that should be no problem. And carefully power it up. And keep my fingers crossed. Otherwise, I will have to try to dig up some service info, because I really don't know anything about this camera. I've taken a generic rounded computer type plug here and I cut the end off and stripped the leads. But before I wire that directly into the camera, I'm going to take the stubby remains of the old cord and just tack this on and wrap it in some electrical tape to see if the camera is actually salvageable. It's a real shame too, because this old cord was a really high quality. They had wrapped it in several layers of cloth here and twine. What that would do is provide a lot of strain relief to the cord so it wouldn't fray, as opposed to this more modern cord which has nothing. It's just the 3 wires inside of a plastic jacket. I imagine they did this because they figured the camera would get rotated a lot, maybe on its tripod. Now before I solder that on, I just got some new solder and I thought I'd take the opportunity to talk about it a little bit. I got a couple of kinds I've been using for the last couple of years in my projects. One is some Kester that I picked up ages ago, which is what they call 44 rosin core. It's really faded here, but it's more visible in this box. I guess not. What the 44 is, it's a type of rosin that works really, really well. So if you're trying to solder to some copper that's kind of corroded, this stuff will do a real nice job of adhering to it. Now, if you haven't tried soldering before, or tried soldering to old stuff, when the old terminals or leads or copper gets corroded, oxidized, and so on, it can be really hard to solder to. What the rosin core does is it's a flux. It cleans off the surface of the metal and lets you solder more easily. Where it's contained is actually inside of this lead tin solder I've got here is actually hollow on the inside, and that's where the rosin core is. Rosin is kind of like tree sap. The other type of solder I use now and then is multi-core. Multi-core, as I show in the picture there, actually has more than one hollow core that contains the rosin. But for whatever reason, this formulation of rosin seems to work better with old electronics than this stuff. Also, this is a finer gauge, so when you're soldering onto larger old type terminals, you really have to feed a lot of this in to complete the solder joint. And even with this stuff, I still had to feed in a lot of solder, so like maybe like this much just to solder one terminal. So I picked up some new stuff. This is also Kester. It's also 44 core, but this is really fat stuff. So this should be really nice for soldering the old vintage stuff. So I can just use a small amount of it to really finish the connection quickly. That's important because the longer you keep the soldering iron held to a joint and the more solder you feed in, you're actually heating up the leads and the surrounding components, which can cause some problems. It can cause some of the old wax components to start melting. It can cause some of the old insulation to start shriveling up or even start burning in the case of cotton insulation. So you want to solder as quickly as possible, but also make sure you get a really solid joint. And I find the larger diameter works better for older stuff. For this in particular, it's nice shiny new copper, and I've got plenty of the multi-core, so I'm going to go with that. Oh, and one final thing is the actual alloy mix. This stuff is 60-40, whereas this is SN63. What that means is this, I believe, is 60% tin, 40% lead, or maybe it's the other way around, I forget which. This is 63 and 37. 6337 is a magic alloy, or what they call eutectic, I think is how you pronounce it. What that means is an alloy of these two metals with that ratio, as it goes from a molten state to a solid state, as soon as it hits a certain temperature, it instantly goes solid. So it goes from liquid to solid immediately. Whereas this stuff will go from liquid and it get kind of gummy and slowly go to a solid. So it's really just a personal preference for this kind of work. Plus, when you're soldering to old connections and there's still some old solder there, as soon as you melt this into it, your alloy is going to change a bit. But it's kind of interesting when you work with this, the difference. Because when you solder with this stuff, say you're just soldering two wires together freehand, you're going to have to hold them very still while the solder solidifies, or else you're liable to get a cold joint, which means a joint that's not hasn't really crystallized and solidified solidly to hold those wires together. Whereas this stuff, if you can hold it long enough to go from liquid to solid, it just instantly solidifies and you get a nice hard joint. So let's see. I'll try to put this camera up so you can actually see how I solder these on. I'm using a Weller WES51 soldering station. It has a variable temperature gauge, and what's extra nice with this is that when you set it to a certain temperature, when you apply the tip to the joint, if it's a larger piece of metal, it'll start to cool down the tip. Well, this will sense that and pump more current into the tip to maintain that temperature you've selected. So I think that's kind of a nice feature. Also fairly inexpensive. The tips are readily available, and I've been using it for several years now, and I like it a lot. So here are the 3 wires coming out of the camera. What I'm going to do first is what they call tin those leads. When you solder, you don't apply the solder to the tip of the iron and then try to apply it to the wire. There's nothing's going to happen. It's just going to stay on the hot tip. What you need to do is heat one side of the wire and apply the solder to the other side. And it'll actually draw itself in and coat all of those strands on the copper wire like that. Do it on this black guy, maybe it's in frame better. Like I said, with this finer gauge solder, you have to apply a bit more. And then finally, put the green one down here. Touch this one up a little bit. Alright, now I can do the same to the other wires, and then when I bring them together to solder them together, it'll be much easier than if I tried to bring in 2 bare copper wires and solder them together at the same time. Okay, now remember, this is just temporary, just to see if I can get the camera to work. If I was really going to splice 2 wires like this, I would have stripped off a lot more and kind of braided the 2 wires together to provide mechanical strength before I tried to solder it together. But for now, I'm just going to tack these together. I've got all 6 wires tinned, so I'll just put the black by the black, and now I just need to melt the solder. The solder is already well impregnated into the copper wiring, and like that. Like I said, as soon as it hits that certain temperature, the solder just immediately solidifies. You don't have to really hold it for very long with this particular alloy of solder. And that's 2 and 1 left. And it's just as it cools down a bit, I'll wrap this all well in electrical tape so nothing shorts out while I'm testing the camera out. That's it. As I said, this is just temporarily. Even with electrical tape around it, it may look okay, but with a bit of flexing and such, this is not a very strong mechanical connection, so please don't wire anything like this. You can use wire nuts, but I really prefer to solder it, and there are more secure ways to do it than this. If you go online and search maybe for wire splicing, you'll see that there's certain connections like a linesman splice they used to use in telegraph lines when they would have to attach 2 long lengths of wire together. It's kind of like barbed wire. You take the 2 ends and you twist them around in a certain way so that it's virtually impossible to pull the 2 wires apart. It's a nice little technique to learn. And here's my temporary splice. I used some electrical tape and wrapped the 3 wires individually and then wrapped the whole thing up a bit. And now what I'm going to do is plug it into my Variac, which has about a 1 amp fuse. I know it says 5 amp on there, but I replaced it with a lower amperage fuse because I want the added protection. Nothing I've been working on lately draws anywhere near that amount of current. Because this device does not have a fuse in it, and this will, provide protection. Let's see, it's turned off. Now I don't know the user's manual for this, and I don't really know much about it or how to use it, but I can pretty well figure that off is off and standby will apply power to part of the circuitry. I imagine the high voltage going to the camera tube will be disabled, and then on will be full on. But because I don't have the viewfinder on top or anything, I can't really tell it's working other than this is probably a light here that'll go on. So first I'll put it on and just to make sure that nothing goes up in smoke, and if it seems to work stably, then I will attach my scope and see what kind of signal I get out of this. Alright, so here goes, and here goes. That's a good sign. One of these days I really got to pick up an ACM meter so I can monitor how much current's being drawn by stuff. The indicator light is on. It's glowing kind of a faint orangish. And the video tube is glowing. The filament on it's glowing. It's a good sign. So I'm going to go for broke. Yeah, nothing seemed to change between standby and on. It's still orange here. And I'm kind of cocking my ear because sometimes with these flyback type transformers, they resonate at around 15 kilohertz and you can kind of hear it. But this device is being awfully quiet. I'm going to let it run for a few minutes and then hook my scope up and see if there's a signal coming out of that jack. I let the camera run for about 10 minutes and nothing bad seemed to be happening, so I took the stubby video cable that came with it, stripped it back, and hooked it up to my scope. And I got this nice signal here, which to my eye looks pretty much like a video signal should. And if I put my hand over the front of the lens, you can see it has a definite effect. So I think the next step is to run some type of cable to a TV and see what kind of image I can get out of this. I wired the camera to the antenna input on this TV here, but I don't seem to be able to pick it up. All I am getting are the few local UHF transmissions that are left. Like, this is channel 25, home shopping network of some sort. That's some religious programming, Korean network, and I think this is Me TV, vintage TV programming network, and that's about it. So I think what I will do is put this into video mode, and I just happen to have an RF modulator I got off of eBay a while ago. I've never actually used that I can feed the video into and then output on channel 3 or 4, and I'll give that a try. That's much better. So the modulator is going to the TV and the input's coming from the video camera, and when I put my hand in front of it, it's reacting. It's not going to focus though because I don't have the lens attached. But without the lens attached, I realized that what the standby mode does. So see, there's the actual camera element. When I flip this over to standby, a shield actually drops over the camera and the video goes to black. So it's actually a mechanical switch, not electrical. Alright, it's actually working. This just seems to be some sort of vertical synchronization error. That's why there's a kind of a bar there. So what I've got this pointing to is actually some two boxes on this windowsill over here. And I can get it in focus pretty good. And if I shine a light on it, you can clearly see it's picking up the light. But see that top box there? It's got a type 30 in it. That's kind of repeating down at the bottom there. So I think that the vertical sync pulse is off kilter a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, it seems to be working pretty good. For now, the main reason I want to get a camera working is so that I can use it as a sort of poor man's test pattern generator. So what I'm doing now is I went online and found a nice high-resolution image of the old Indian test pattern, and I'm printing it out, and I hope to be able to set that up in front of the camera such that I can see it on my TV. And then I can use that on my vintage TVs to align them and adjust them such that I get the best picture. Here's a test pattern I printed out, and I've got the camera pointing at it, and it's actually a pretty decent image. It's just that the vertical synchronization is all out of whack, but if I can get that squared away, I think I'll have a fairly usable black and white video camera.